So in this segment, we'll take a look at emerging regulatory guidance and artificial intelligence machine learning methods. This is an area that's under development. This is all in the space of early drafts, early versions of these documents. Our regulators are grappling with two conflicting objectives. On the one hand, we have this exciting new technology that has a huge amount of promise in solving many problems and could be harnessed to hugely benefit many patients around the world. On the other hand, we have technology we don't really understand, and our challenge here is to come up with rules and regulations such that the use of this technology is safe for humans. So if you remember from the earlier part of this class, I mentioned that the FDA a study by the FDA reported that 80% of all problems in medical software over a particular time were a result of software updates. Here we're talking about algorithms that, to reach their full potential, need to self-learn and to self-update and to update in real time. So you can understand that there's a significant number of challenges in this area, and the regulators, like all of us, are struggling to figure out how to resolve these problems. So we will take a look at 4 different guidance documents, just to give you a sense of how regulators around the world are trying to solve this puzzle. We will look at the AI Lifecycle National Standard from Germany. This is DIN Spec 9200-1 from 2019. We'll look at some recent guidance from the Chinese National Medical Products Administration. We will look at some draft guidance by the FDA that also came out in 2019. And in the next segment, we'll take a little bit of a deeper dive into a guidance from Singapore, which to my mind is actually one of the nicest documents. At least tries to cover all the issues in a concise, short section, and is well worth reading for students. That would be my recommendation. This is an emerging area. There are huge benefits. There are many potential risks, and everything appears to be in flux. So take it as this is where we are right now. So the first document we'll look at is this AI Lifecycle. This is the German national standard. You can see the German flag in the corner. And this first defines this lifecycle, and this is the usual software lifecycle style definition. We go from concept to development to deployment to operation to retirement, and then defines how these things should be done in the concept of AI models. The other aspect of it is that it situates the model. When most people think of machine learning, they think about that function F. That F is the model. But the model is really dependent on the data, so the data is almost bigger than the model. The data lives on a certain platform, and then we have the general environment. So as we discuss this thing, we need to expand our field of view, not only to look at the model, the particular kind of neural network, which is what people who do research in machine learning think about, but all the other aspects, the data, the platform, the environment. The other thing that this document defines is these 3 quality pillars. First is functionality and performance, which should be obvious. We want our model to work. Second, we want to think about robustness. And we're going to talk a lot more about this problem of robustness when Professor Onofre comes in the last segment. But fundamentally, how do we deal with issues that derive from either changes to the data that are unintentional, we just simply get data from a different distribution, or changes to the data that are intentional, perhaps adversarial attacks, things designed to trick the system. So this is the goal. Is the input data, this is what the issues with robustness are, from a different distribution than the training data. And these are called distribution shifts. We have to be able to detect those and flag them. Are we dealing with an adversarial attack? Is somebody trying to adversely affect the performance on the network? And then the other aspects here have to do with the comprehensibility of the network. Can we understand what the network is doing? And we are dealing with issues like interpretable AI. So interpretable AI is, given the black box that is often a complicated neural network, and you have heard about them in the last segment, can we understand what it's doing? So interpretable AI means, can we actually understand operation by operation? And this often means that we have to use, if this is required, a simpler model like a straight line, at which point it's very easy to explain, to interpret what happened, okay? You're above the line, you're here, you're below the line, this is the line, we know exactly what happens. The next word you'll hear is explainable AI, and this associated European regulation, the GDPR, right to an explanation. So explainable AI is not quite the same as interpretable. It's a weaker statement. It says, can we at least draw a cartoon of what this model is doing? Can we vaguely explain what's going on? Not to the level that you could explain what every little piece of it is, but at least give somebody a sense of what's going on. And this is where problem comes with this piece of legislation in Europe and the right to an explanation. So we'll discuss this a little bit more in the next slide. In the GDPR and the recital 71, there's this very interesting section on the right to an explanation. So let's read a little bit from it. The data subject should have the right not to be subject to a decision which may include evaluating personal aspects related to him or her, which is based solely on automated processing, such as automatic refusal of an online credit application or e-recruiting practices without any human intervention. And here's the punchline. In any case, such processing should be subject to suitable safeguards, which should include specific information to the data subject, i.e. the person, and the right to obtain human intervention to express his or her point of view, i.e. to complain, to obtain an explanation of the decision reached after such assessment, and to challenge the decision. So the whole point is, what does it mean to obtain an explanation of something that's a deep neural network? So for more on this, we have a video clip from Dr. Andrea Biasucci to explain a little bit more about this topic.
I would say that this is one of the elements where we play with the gray zone, meaning that we would like the world to be black and white, but most of the cases palette of colors sometimes even. So the right to an explanation is one of the areas where as the European Union said of itself, it's vague and open-ended, meaning that there is the principle that if you get rejected, for example, let's assume a case that's not medical. You ask for a bank loan and they deny it. You have the right to know why. That's your right. And if it was an artificial intelligence that did it, they should explain that according to their model that is based on these parameters, you fall in the percentile of people that most likely will not pay back. That would be a reasonable explanation in Europe that would fulfill the requirements for you to receive an explanation, which has nothing to do with the technicality of how this is implemented. I wouldn't tell you that you have 3 layers of neurons that are interacting with each other and a deep layer that no one knows what it does. But so from this perspective, it's fairly easy to find a formulation that would meet the right of people to receive an explanation that is based on the data.
So that's that situation. The other aspect that the German document focuses on is in this whole concept of training data management. And here's some comments here. The data used by an AI module plays a significant role in its performance and quality. Due to the increasing amount and the use of large data sources, it is particularly important to address issues of representability, diversity in many ways, availability, and quality of data. In the context of ML, these aspects can have a significant influence on achieving the intended outcomes. And the final statement, therefore, data is one of the major topics when reasoning about the requirements of AI modules. And this is one of the paradigm shifts as we start thinking about machine learning and its use in software. Historically in software, the most important thing was the code. The data was used to do a little bit of testing on the side. We used data to create nice pictures, but for the most part, the critical, I think, was the code. This is where the hard work went. When it comes to machine learning, often the code is actually straightforward. It's very standardized models. What separates one product from another is the data that was used to train the model. So the data is critical, and the management of the data is almost the most important aspect of this process. I once have jokingly explained to the friend that in machine learning, if you're smarter, meaning you have a better model, and I have more data or better data, 9 out of 10 I will beat you. And that is the reality here. And it's almost a little bit deflating for programmers. We're used to being judged on the quality of their code, but here the real value is often on the data and not the code. And that causes a complete paradigm shift as to how to think about developing these things, as to how we think about data and how we manage data in general. So this is a summary. There's a paradigm shift from code to data as to what is most important. The most important thing is really the data here. Let's take a look at a second document. This comes from China, and this is a technical review guideline on AI-aided software. It's a draft. I would like to thank the good people at China MedDevice for providing us with an unofficial translation of this document. We actually had the original and we were able to double check it at Yale, so this translation was fairly accurate. So, of the many segments here, the one I would choose to highlight is again this concept of training data management. They break it up into 4 steps. There's data acquisition, which involves quality control and anonymization. This is the data privacy aspect here. Data pre-processing, we may need to standardize our data, perhaps for images to have the same resolution. We may need to normalize the images to have the same intensity range, as Professor Onofri will give an example of in the last segment of this week. We have data annotation. This is the annotation by experts to create the ground truth. So remember the X-Y pairs. We have the X's, these are the images. The Y's are the annotations. Is this cancer? Is this not cancer? And finally, the construction of a data set, the division into training and testing set and keeping things separate. The other thing that this document talks about extensively is validation. And they define that what they would like to see is or sometimes prospective trials. So in a prospective trial, new data that is specially acquired for this task. And we have retrospective trials where old data is used to evaluate new methods. And the NMPA says that retrospective trials are acceptable for low-risk applications. So when you're doing a clinical study, sometimes you can get away with doing a retrospective trial. We have a lot of patients have gone to the hospital, they have already been imaged, they have already been diagnosed, and if we can get our hands on that data, we can simulate the clinical trial retrospectively by pulling the images out, applying our algorithm, and seeing how well it did compared to the existing diagnosis. And the NMPA says that that's okay for low-risk applications, but for high-risk applications, they would like to see prospective trials where we're acquiring new data, especially for this task where we have never seen this data before, because it creates another barrier to any kind of contamination or anything other problems that come about. The design of the trial should be in the original design of the software. So again, your validation plan should be finished before you start actually doing anything. And the testing data ideally should come from a separate organization than the training data. And finally, the people doing the testing should be separate from the people developing the model. And all of those things are just there to create integrity in the process and to just eliminate any hidden biases that come by people who actually know what the software is doing. Is this an outlier? Can we throw it out? Those are issues that can create all kinds of biases, and having independent people helps. The third document in this row, and this is the last one for this segment, is this guidance from the FDA, and you can see the title, Proposed Regulatory Framework for Modifications to Artificial Intelligence Machine Learning-Based Software as a Medical Device. I want to underline this word, modifications. This is the point of how do we regulate software that updates itself. And so let's look at the flowchart. I have a flowchart here with all kinds of steps. We're not going to walk through it, but I want to highlight two aspects of this flowchart. We first, if we're going to have an algorithm that modifies itself, we have to explicitly figure out what the types of anticipated modifications are. And this is labeled as the summed pre-specification. This is a definition of the kinds of things that the algorithm will change, the ways it will change. And then we also have to specify, according to draft guidance, the methodology to implement these changes in a controlled manner that manages the risks to the patients. And this was called the Algorithm Change Protocol, or the ACP. And again, I would just to re-emphasize the same issue here. If you think back to the original FDA guidance, the GPSV, then the statement that 80% of the problems happen when updates, we're now talking about algorithms that will update themselves. So we have to have procedures, very careful procedures in place such that these updates happen in a safe manner and we do not create additional risks to the patients. So to conclude this section, a big part of the challenge is that we don't really have any good way to do analytical validation of machine learning algorithms. We don't know what the results should be outside of those examples. It would be nice to try to understand them and to create this type of techniques because it will simplify life, but for now we do not have that. We do not understand how this algorithm works. For example, deep learning. They are black boxes. They appear to do something interesting, but the ability to explain and interpret what's going on is missing. And the key challenge here is to establish what data is needed for testing and for validation. Given the wrong kinds of data, we get artificially inflated results. Given the right set of data, we may be able to get a true handle on what's going on. Because we don't really understand what the algorithm is doing, we just have to test it enough to get to a point. And to sort of summarize a lot of this discussion, I have one more clip from Dr. Nicholas Patrick from the FDA on precisely this topic.
It's important that we try to figure out how to understand them. And I completely understand that that's not the case right now with a lot of deep learning, where there's a lot of art to putting these algorithms together. They're very complicated as far as number of layers and structures and feed forward and feedback loops and so forth and integrated within them. But the more we can understand why these systems might be operating the way they are, the easier it's going to be to try to evaluate them and understand, and then come up with various testing that may not be so much clinical testing on large populations, but more specialized testing to determine that they're consistent or they'll work appropriately. So that being said, we still have to live with these algorithms that are complicated and we don't quite understand. What we've done is, I think, and we've been working on these for more than 20 years, is to have a structure in place for all of these statistical learning or machine learning types of algorithms. So regardless of whether it's a deep learning algorithm or it's a linear classifier with features, they can be evaluated in the same way in assessing the standalone data as well as the clinical populations in the data. Now, The deep learning algorithm may be more complicated. It may have more variability associated with it. There are differences in properties. But the assessment methodology that we've laid out for AI in general is still applicable for how we approach it. And the biggest question is, what types of data do you need? So now the question becomes less about the structure of the testing, but then what is the data requirements? What type of data? How large does it need to be? What distributions, what subgroups need to be within that data to give confidence that it'll work appropriately in the clinical population?
And the promise and the value of these algorithms and the results that we are seeing from both research studies and from some of those that have been approved are such that we are now being forced to sort of learn a new way of analyzing and understanding algorithms, because we kind of say just because we don't understand them, we should ignore them. The promise is too high for that to be okay. In the next segment, we'll sort of move on and take a deep dive at one of these regulatory documents, the guidance from Singapore, and just walk through the steps of what one particular regulator is thinking right now. Thank you.